The 2010s. This decade has been a golden age for nonfiction. In this video, I created 10 questions, and we're going to discuss what made this decade so great for nonfiction. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to tag 10 booktubers who are then going to make videos and pass it around this platform. So are you ready for this? Hello, I'm Samuel Durham. I really do think that we are living through a golden age of nonfiction. The 2010s have offered us an embarrassment of riches when it comes to great nonfiction. Now, what could be the reasons? Well, that's another video entirely. But I do think that the increase in ebooks and how about the increase in the number of courses being offered in the real world and online for writing, both for fiction and for non-fiction. And in the last 15 years, a lot more people are studying courses like journalism and non-fiction writing at universities all around the world, especially in countries like the UK and the United States. And also master's degrees. Again, there are a lot more courses to go where students can specialize in non-fiction writing. These are some of the reasons, and I think we're lucky as a result of that. So a whole new generation of writers have joined the old guard, like Malcolm Gladwell and Naomi Klein, who already dominated the 90s and then the last decade. But in this decade, we come up with some great new voices. And I think the major things that I noticed, and I'm sure you have, is the importance of diversity and inclusion. Now, one of the best books that I read this month is Unicorn. It's a memoir of a Muslim drag queen. It is brilliantly written. And 15 years ago, I don't think a book like that would have been published. And even if it had been published, there might not have been a big marketing campaign behind it. Or even if there had been, maybe the public might not have received it that well. I'm not sure. But I think a lot of things have changed in publishing and in the world, especially in countries like Britain and the United States. So as a result, a book like Unicorn is selling well, is getting a lot of attention. And I think that's a good thing. This is a book that is succeeding on its merits and not just because of a culture of diversity and inclusion. But these are some of the things that I noticed. In the comment section, tell me, why do you think there's been a boom in nonfiction? Now, I'm not saying that nonfiction writers are making a lot of money. There are some nonfiction authors like Lauren Hildebrand and Malcolm Gladwell and others. They're making a lot of money, but at the other level, there might not be that much money there. But the fact is, a lot of titles are being published. So in this video, 10 questions. I think everybody who loves nonfiction would have a lot to say. I think we could even make an argument that maybe too many books were published in this decade, both fiction and nonfiction. So as a result of it, we all of us would have plenty of examples, and for 10 years of reading. And I think this is a good time and a good chance to celebrate what's gone before and look forward to the next decade. This is about your biggest passion within nonfiction. What is your favorite genre? And what is that one book that you love so much? The thing about nonfiction, there are genres, and within that there are lots of subgenres. For example, biography, which is one of my favorite genres. Within biography, we have literary biographies, literary memoirs, the confessional memoir, the misery memoir, journals, diaries, and so on, celebrity memoir. So that's a huge genre by itself. Now, to me, the favorite subgenre within that is the literary memoir. And I just loved John le Carré's The Pigeon Tunnel. He's one of my favorite novelists of all time. And I just love his voice. It's elegantly written, as always. And also, a lot of scenes unfold like as if they were in a novel. And I also loved Anne Patchett's memoir. Now, I think it's good to, right now, to make a distinction between the memoir or autobiography and the biography. I once heard on BBC Radio 4 somebody discuss it, and they said that a memoir is the way the author saw the world, and the biography is the way the world saw the author. So in my case, for example, John le Carre, Pigeon Tunnel is the way John le Carre saw the world. But Adam Sisman's biography is the way the world saw John le Carre. So anyway, what is your favorite genre? And your education, your self-improvement, or autodidacticism. Now, what is that one book that really helped you to learn or improve a new skill? For me, it has to be cooking. Now, I do a lot of cooking, but I wanted to take it to the next level. And I've been a big fan of Nigella Lawson for a long time. And in this decade, in the 2010s, she published two really important books, Simply Nigella and At My Table, all about home cooking. And I found that really useful. The thing about Nigella, compared to so many other cookery or food writers, is that she writes brilliantly. I don't think there's anyone on the planet who can write better about food than Nigella Lawson. Even in the 1990s, Nigella Lawson would be on TV, on British TV, and probably American TV as well, talking about books, literature. And in the last 20 years, and in this decade, Nigella has consolidated that brand, which is about really classy, cultured cooking and those books. And I found them really useful. And also, she's also on YouTube. There's a great video that I'm going to put in the description below, where she's talking about The Great Gatsby and a recipe that she created. And a lot of her stuff is like that. And the books are a real joy to read. Tell me, I mean, have you read Nigella Lawson before? Have you used her books? You're out of your comfort zone non-fiction book of the decade. What is that? I'm talking about that genre of non-fiction that you don't normally read. Maybe you might be intimidated by it, or you look down upon it. Maybe you're one of those people who never reads celebrity memoirs, but then you might have picked up Bruce Springsteen's autobiography and then you liked it. It's like that. So with me, now, when I was at school, I never liked maths. But what happened was, I think around in 2017 or 2018, somebody gave me this book, Hidden Figures, as a gift. And I wasn't so sure, but I knew a movie was coming out. So I thought I'll give it a go. And I read it. The book is about a group of African-American mathematicians from the 1940s onwards who worked for an organization that was the precursor to NASA. And although there's a lot of technical information in it and graphs and all that, I got into it because ultimately what the author has done is to use great characters to tell a great story, and a really important story, which ultimately forms an integral part of the history of the United States, especially the civil rights movement. And to me, I find it a really unusual book, that it worked brilliantly. Great characters, and it's not, now the prose isn't that great, but I wasn't expecting that, but I enjoyed it, and I was surprised by it. I wouldn't, if somebody had told me that this has a lot of technical information, a lot of science, maths, I wouldn't have read it. But I think I was out of my comfort zone, but I really enjoyed it. I would love to hear what's your out of your comfort zone non-fiction book. What is the quirkiest, the strangest, or the most unconventional non-fiction book that you read in the 2010s? Now, there's been quite a lot of these. When I say unconventional, weird, or eccentric, what I mean is that it could be the content or the execution of that idea. For me, it has to be Unicorn, which is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a memoir about a British Iraqi drag queen. Now, I just said British Iraqi drag queen. Now, if the author is watching this, he might say, actually, I'm a lot more than that, because that book has so much to do with identity, and it's written in brilliant prose. It's funny. Now, I am going to make a separate video about this particular memoir, Unicorn, but I think it's just an amazing piece of writing, that it also encapsulates what this decade has been about in publishing, especially to do with the drive towards diversity and inclusion. And this is a book that's so brilliant that I think that if you have a heart, if you have a great capacity for empathy and curiosity, and if you ever felt as though you were an outsider, and I think this is a book that you will find a lot to think about. But at the same time, Unicorn has already incited a lot of hatred and trolls online, and that's the real shame. I might have to talk about that in my other video, but if you get the opportunity, at least read the sample pages on Amazon and have a look, because it really is, I think it's one of the most important books of the decade. Unicorn. Which non-fiction book from the 2010s you wish you had written, and why? Now, have you heard of James Wood? Now, if you love literary fiction, you might know James Wood already. James Wood is a British literary critic, essayist, and a novelist. And he'd already published 2 collections of essays. And he's already published a book called How Fiction Works, which I found really useful. But in this decade, in 2013, he published another collection of essays called The Fun Stuff. And James Wood also contributes essays to The New Yorker. And his essays are a feast for the mind. Now, if you love literary fiction and great prose, you're going to love James Wood. Martin Amis once said that James Wood is one of the few good literary critics alive, and I agree. And I love Harold Bloom, and what James Wood brings to the discussion is a great prose style, very analytical, and he really truly lives and breathes serious literary criticism. Now, in this collection, James Wood had written some great essays on Kazuo Ishiguro, Yeats, Marilyn Robinson, W.D. Sebald, Cormac McCarthy, and many others. And I think, again, if you love great prose, great literary criticism, really substantial pieces of work, then you would like James Wood. If you haven't read him before and you love literary fiction, you must go back, you must go and check out his 2 earlier collections, and How Fiction Works, and all that. Read everything. Which is that one book that encapsulates, epitomizes, or defines the 2010s for you? Now, in 20 or 30 years' time, when we look back to the 2010s, what are we going to think about? What is that book that defined that decade? I mean, to me, if we had to look at the last decade, for example, if I had to pick one book, it would have to be Barack Obama's memoir, Dreams of My Father. Now, that one, although that book was published in the mid-1990s, it was reprinted in the last decade, and I think, and then his election, it changed so many things in the United States and all around the world. So, but how about this decade? What is that one book that truly defines and encapsulates what this decade has been about? To me, it is a book that I just read a few days ago, which is She Said by Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey. And this is about the 2 journalists at the New York Times. Now, Megan Twohey and Jodi Kantor investigated the cases surrounding Harvey Weinstein, and the book reads like a thriller. It is gripping. It's shocking. There are things there that you can't believe that has happened, and in the writing of the book, Harvey Weinstein did all sorts of things that could come from a Hollywood movie to try and stop these 2 reporters from reporting on this case, or to search to find the truth. And there's that cliche about journalism, because the purpose is to speak the truth to power. And I think in many ways, She Said is a book that does that and succeeds in doing it, and it has changed so many things. This is the work of Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey has been credited with giving a big momentum to the Me Too movement. And I think in decades to come, this is a book that's going to be studied for so many reasons. And I think this is a book, again, to me, this is a book that truly encapsulates this decade. Now, at the start of this decade, this is when we first started to hear a lot of accusations about public figures or former celebrities like Jimmy Savile in the UK, and then now we've seen this with Harvey Weinstein. There's another book that is equally important for this decade, which is Ronan Farrow's book as well. I think together they are quite important for this decade and what this decade has been about, which is about what is your favorite celebrity memoir of the 2010s? If you don't like celebrity memoirs, if you want to take a culturally elitist position on this, then do please explain why you look down on celebrity culture or celebrity memoirs, or why it doesn't interest you. I think that would be a good discussion as well. The reason why I wanted to make a separate question about this is because we are living through a golden age of celebrity. Way back in 2003, when Martin Amis was promoting his novel Yellow Dog, he said that he feels as though in the UK he's living with 60 million people who all want to be famous. And he said in the future you're going to have a situation where a lot of people will have their own TV channels. He must have been joking, but we are living in that era. In 2003, there was no YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, none of that. But now, in 2019, we're nearly in 2020. Look, so many of us got our own channels, and there is so much about celebrities, and there are so many books published in this decade on this topic. So what is that one book? Now, if you want to take a culturally elitist position and say, oh, I don't read any celebrity memoirs, they're trash, or, I don't think they're any good, I do kindly and delicately recommend you read a book called What Good Are the Arts by Professor John Carey. John Carey is one of my favorite literature academics in England, and this is a really important book about anti-elitism. You don't have to read James Joyce and Tolstoy to experience the joy of art. I mean, I find joy, don't judge me, but I find a lot of joy in listening to a Taylor Swift song. At the same time, that I do read a lot of Shakespeare. I can listen to Mahler and, I don't know, Coldplay or U2. So I think taking a culturally elitist position, it denies you the possibility to experience so many other pleasures. Celebrity memoirs, I read a lot of those. I really enjoy Lena Dunham's memoir, the creator and writer of Girls, and I know she's fallen out of favor recently, but she has a distinct voice, and it is funny. I also loved Tina Fey's Bossy Pants. Tina Fey, the creator and actress of 30 Rock. But the one that I really enjoyed that I can reread is Amy Poehler's Yes Please. Her memoir is funny, and it's got all these pages that could be slogans. And now comes the biggie. Which is your favorite biography of the 2010s? Now, as I said before, biography is such a broad genre with lots of subgenres, but what is that big substantial biography that you really loved and that it meant a lot to you? Adam Sisman's biography of John le Carré is a really important piece of work for me, because he's one of my favorite novelists, and I've always been fascinated by lots of other things that John le Carré did in the 1960s and 70s, and this is a really detailed and thorough biography that's a good pairing with his memoir, The Pigeon Tunnel. The other biography that means a lot to me is David Blythe's biography of Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. When I was at university, I studied a lot of American literature, but at that time there wasn't one great substantial biography of Frederick Douglass. But this effort by David Blythe is really important. It's magnificent. I hope they make a TV series on Netflix about this. But the biography that I think means a little bit more to me is Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs that was published in the early part of this decade. And now Walter Isaacson is the superstar biographer of our time. His biography of Da Vinci is equally compelling. But the one about Steve Jobs is amazing, because this decade is also about innovations in technology, especially entrepreneurship. And so many big corporations and so many entrepreneurs are heavily influenced by Steve Jobs. And Walter Isaacson chronicles how this guy changed so many things in technology and design, the way we look at smartphones. And everything. He changed so many things about the way we live now that we don't realize. So Steve Jobs is such a huge figure in 21st century life. And Walter Isaacson is brilliant at covering that time in the history of technology and design. Have you seen the movie, the Aaron Sorkin screenplay and then the Danny Boyle movie? Fantastic. It's a masterclass in screen adaptation because when I was reading the biography, I thought, how could there be a good film out of this? How could there be something so fresh and original? But Aaron Sorkin found a way, and then Danny Boyle gave all that energy, and it's a great film as well. So for me, the biography that is inspiring and illuminating is Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson. Which non-fiction book changed your life in a minor or major way, and how? Now, sometimes you hear people saying, oh, that book changed my life, and it's a cliche. I mean, can a book really change somebody's life? But I think in my case it has, and I'm sure you might have a book that changed your life, especially a book that was published in the 2010s. Now, I used to have this big addiction to sugar. Now, I don't drink alcohol, I don't smoke, I don't take any recreational drugs, but my biggest problem was sugar, processed sugar. And it was harder to beat that addiction. But then one day I came across this long speech, a talk on YouTube about the dangers of sugar by Professor Robert Lustig. Then it turns out that he had written this book, Fat Chance. So I had to read it, and this was in, I think, 2013 or 2014. And then it took me 6 attempts to give up sugar, processed sugar. So I used to love eating chocolates, cookies, ice cream, donuts, all that junk. So, but I knew that if I don't stop, I will probably going to bring on type 2 diabetes, which is a major killer, right? And this book also warns about the dangers of other diseases. So I had to stop it. But anyway, it took me 6 attempts and 3 years to stop eating all that junk. But then on the 20th of October 2015, I gave it up. And after that, I managed to stay away from my greatest nemesis, processed sugar. And this is an important book, a great science as well as self-improvement, and it's also become a diary for me. I've written all sorts of things in it about my struggles to beat this. I mean, if you don't know much about the dangers of sugar, you think I'm just joking around, but sugar can be more dangerous than alcohol or heroin or cocaine because we don't realize it. So this is something we can consume every single day. Most people who might take heroin, they might not do it 7 days a week, but it's easy to eat cookies and chocolates every day and also damage the liver and all sorts of other parts of the body. So this really has changed my life. I keep this book with me regularly all over the house because I don't want to regress. I don't want to go back to that person who was eating a lot of sugar. And now seriously though, if you do have a problem when you feel as though you don't have much energy and you're losing focus, and when you get up in the morning you feel really tired and or lethargic already, one of the reasons could be that you got too much sugar, you eat too much saturated fats, and that's clogging you, that's just making you feel clogged up. And getting rid of all that, it takes a lot of effort. Don't forget, it took me 3 years, a lot of persistence. But eventually you get to that stage where you don't need chocolates and cookies. You don't need all those comfort foods. You don't need cake. And then you end up having so much energy. I mean, I could easily work for 18 hours. And then at midnight, I could still go out running if I wanted to. Because it gives you all that energy and focus. And so I do recommend it. If you're curious about the dangers of sugar, or if you're somebody who has an addiction to cakes, chocolate cake, carrot cake, chocolates, read this one. Gratitude. The secret to happiness is gratitude. Don't you think so? Now, this part, I don't want to get all sanctimonious and self-righteous, but I do feel as though I have to talk about this importance of gratitude. A lot of self-improvement books would touch on this subject. People like Warren Buffett and Tony Robbins, for example, have talked about the fact that so many multimillionaires and multi-billionaires, they're not really happy because they don't appreciate the things that they already have. But I don't think you need to have billions or millions to feel the power of gratitude. And I think the power of nonfiction is that it takes us to places and it takes us to get to know people, and reading about their lives or their worlds makes us feel grateful for the things that we already have. Now, even I complain about things and wish I had this, I wish I had that, instead of being grateful for the things I already have. And I think one of the causes of low moods and depression has to be this failure to recognize the things that we already have. Instead of having a mindset of abundance, we seem to cultivate a mindset of scarcity. So reading a lot of nonfiction books, I feel that with me, it allows me to appreciate the things that I already have. Now, one of the books that meant a lot to me with this particular issue is I Am Malala, the girl who was shot by Taliban for standing for her right to have an education as a girl in Pakistan. A moving and important memoir. The other book, of course, has a lot to do with one of the most talked about TV shows of this year, Chernobyl. Craig Mason, the screenwriter behind Chernobyl, has talked about how Svetlana Alexievich's book Chernobyl Prayer had a big impact on him and his inspiration for wanting to write that TV show. And I think that's another important book that makes me feel grateful. But the book that really makes me think about things nearly every week is something that I read in 2010. Nothing to Envy was published in 2010, and it soon won the Samuel Johnson Prize for Best Nonfiction. And what I really admire about it is that this is a book that really takes us into a real world dystopia. Now, I read a lot of dystopian novels, like, for example, The Hunger Games and Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale and The Testaments. But those are, as you know, they're imagined dystopias. But what we have in North Korea is a real world dystopia, and Nothing to Envy with Barbara Demick goes there. And it's an amazing piece of work. And one of the things that I still think about 9 years after reading that book is about what goes during the nighttime in North Korea. Most of the parts in North Korea goes dark. There isn't much electricity. So they're trying to save energy for all the wrong reasons. So during most nights, most of North Korea goes dark. And it's when you read chapters like that, I realize that how grateful I am to have this thing called electricity and also freedom of speech, right? I can make this video. I can say whatever I want about the president of the United States or the prime minister of Britain, and I don't have to worry that much, right? But that's not the case in North Korea. And also there's so many issues. So Nothing to Envy is a really important book. Again, I don't want to get all sanctimonious, but I do think that nonfiction has this power. Fiction has the same thing as well. But when you read nonfiction, you feel as though, oh my God, this really happened. This really happened. That sensation. So anyway, what do you think? The 2010s. I'm sure when we look back from the year 2050, we're going to look at this decade as the golden age of nonfiction. What do you think? And I'm really looking forward to your responses. I'm going to tag 10 booktubers, and all their names and their channels will be shown right at the end of this video. In the meantime, tell me about all the issues that I raised in this video. I think ultimately what I want to happen is a celebration of nonfiction, the power of nonfiction. We live in a culture where it is too easy to be negative. On YouTube and Twitter, the people who get a lot of likes or a lot of views can sometimes be people who could just keep complaining about things, or who are stirring up debates and controversies. I mean, one recent example is to do with the memoir Unicorn. So, but I think even though we're living in one of the most unpredictable and tumultuous times in history, we also have a lot of things to look forward to. Technology and science is advancing at a frighteningly good pace, and things will get better. Even in Britain, our political situation is uncertain, but there will be a way, there will be a solution. Same in the United States, and I think it's important to be optimistic. One of my favorite novelists from England has been William Golding. And William Golding said that when he was writing Lord of the Flies, he kept thinking about Voltaire's Candide, especially the character Dr. Pangloss, who had this phrase, all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. I really do feel that this is what we must think about in the next decade. Instead of fearing horrible things, I think all is for the best in the best of all possible worlds. And I think These are exciting times, and we can find the solutions, and there is always non-fiction to document what really went on.